Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I want to talk about the eggy subject of Wi-Fi 7 and MLO, multi-link operation, and more precisely I want to talk about a report that was put together a few weeks ago by Michael John Wood over on Ratings. It was a video, there's a link below. We're going to be referring a lot to that report and the video today. Mainly this video is about talking about this channel, our coverage of Wi-Fi 7 and MLO, because us, along with a lot of platforms, should be thinking about the way we have been covering Wi-Fi 7 devices. Now, I'm not monetizing this video. There'll be links below to, as mentioned, the report from Ratings, as well as several key comments and responses that have happened over the course of the last few weeks. And again, we'll get to that on the third section of the video. But this is about whether MLO has been a big old scam. Has it been misreported? Has it been misadvertised? And moreover, does this mean that Wi-Fi 7 devices are just not worth buying right now? But if you've not watched the video or read the report that John put together, do that now, because although it can get a bit technical, I will argue it will give you a fuller picture of why representation and coverage across the board of MLO has been, let's say, a bit shaky. Yet it is technical. The TLDR, in short, the first point is that the marketing materials, the advertisement and the total performance, thanks to the support of MLO on Wi-Fi 7 devices, has been arguably oversold to a point, or at the very least, the capabilities of these devices right now compared to what they could be capable of with full MLO implementation is a matter for debate. Also, the discussion around the naming conventions such as WI-FI7, WI-FI7, WI-FI Certified 7, a lot has really been dug into in the Ratings content that you should check out to learn more about that. But even at an early glance after watching that myself, it became very, very clear that the way the word Wi-Fi 7 was being portrayed on these did differ between a lot of these, so I recommend you check that out. If we were to go down a real caveman explainer here, ultimately, the way these brands have been marketing MLO can be broken down to this. Imagine you had a giant glass with 3 straws inside it, a really thin straw, a thicker straw, and a fat straw. You have all 3 of them, bang, you put it into that drink. The way MLO is being advertised is that you would put all 3 of those in your mouth and drink. Simple as that. And you're getting all of that regardless of the thickness of those straws, because you can aggregate all 3. But the reality is that the 3 straws are actually being drunk one after the other and flicking between them. That is the way MLO is being implemented on these devices. Also, because some of those straws only allow for smaller sips, in this case 20 hertz, 40 hertz, 80 megahertz, 160, 320, etc. We're getting too technical, scale it back. The result is that there's actually even less coming through per packet management. And once you aggregate all of these straws together and you limit the size going down them, that makes the implementation of MLO this way, the way it's actually being done currently, even worse. Now, before we can get onto the subject of whether Wi-Fi 7 routers or client devices are even worth it, and we will get onto that later on, it is worth countering that the hardware to make the most of MLO is actually present in a lot of routers. It is coming down to firmware, changes in software, and implementation and scale up by the brands in feature and firmware updates to allow better implementation, or in some cases any implementation of real MLO on these devices. In some cases, brands have not implemented full access to this for power consumption reasons, because in order to truly integrate MLO, they say the power consumption, CPU and memory, and therefore overall power consumption at the mains power end, would be greatly increased, and that also has to be factored into temps and thermal management as well. Some brands, and again, hats off to Ubiquiti here, because one of their engineers actually directly responded to Ratings over on Reddit. Hopefully you can see it on screen. That part of that was their journey slowly upgrading their systems towards full MLO implementation. And the way they saw it, it was implementing this rather aggressive system early days when most client devices either were never going to support it or didn't have the capability, or there were no plans to upgrade it, such as an Amazon Fire Stick. Some of those have got Wi-Fi 6E and 7. well, a lot of the time, but the Wi-Fi implementation is genuinely unnecessary in those devices and it becomes a buzzword, it sort of makes sense. It doesn't cover, I would argue, the transparency. It doesn't cover, I would argue, some of the promotions around MLO on a number of different devices. And again, hats off to Ubiquiti, who actually responded to this arguably on a Reddit post and not something a bit louder. Still, I do think a lot of these brands, after the coverage here, should respond with something a little bit more formal, or at the very least, show willingness to be transparent about this, something we'll cover at the end of the video. Which brings us back to that question, is Wi-Fi 7 even worth it? Is this just some big marketing swizz? Well, no, I would argue it isn't, because Wi-Fi 7 does still bring advantages. But annoyingly, MLO doesn't seem to be something that we, and by we I definitely include myself, shouldn't be touting as high as we do. So for example, Wi-Fi 7 brings in access to 6 gigahertz frequency. Now, so does Wi-Fi 6E. However, Wi-Fi 7 takes advantage of 320 megahertz connections there. Now, that's important because, to go back to our straw analogy, that allows for bigger gulps. Even if you don't factor in MLO, that means that individual connections can be bigger, and having the extra 6 gigahertz frequency to play with allows for more of them. So irregardless of implementation of MLO, Wi-Fi 7 at the very least brings that. But, as a number of you are going to point out, I'm sure, not all Wi-Fi 7 devices have 6 gigahertz for reasons of cost efficiency, power efficiency, and more. GLI, Wi-Fi 7's Beryl 7, the Slate 7. We've got here, I'm actually reviewing a bunch of travel routers right now, the Asus BE58. The TP-Link, this is currently going through a review that I'm now going to be amending because it hasn't quite reached publication. These are all devices right now that don't feature 6 gigahertz there. And up until recently, I would have said that even though they don't have 6 gigahertz, they still take advantage of MLO, and therefore combining the 2.4 and 5 gigahertz frequencies into an aggregated connection made them quite palatable. That doesn't feel as true anymore if these brands aren't providing MLO in the way that the Wi-Fi 7 original marketing from the certification standard is not the same. Also, MLO aside, Wi-Fi 7 does bring other advantages in terms of frequency management. Better OFDMA, or orthogonal frequency division multiple access, that's right, Mahout and available at parties, is just better with slicing the connections of the frequency up. On top of that, you've got WPA3 encryption as standard. Then you've got just how much data is being squeezed into each connection there. The amplitude modulation, or quad amplitude modulation, or 4K QAM on Wi-Fi 7 is a good thing. Then you've got preambled puncturing, which allows for connections to be better at avoiding and working around obstacles in the network environment there. These are things that are brought in with Wi-Fi 7, but crucially, just like MLO, it becomes a choice by the brand how much or as little of that is implemented on the hardware and software level, both on day 1 and day 1000. The key note here is about transparency. When Ratings put together that report and that video, they weren't doing it to slam Wi-Fi 7 or call it trash. They were also not trying to slam any individual brand. They bought the kit, they tested that kit. They're a large organization, but they still took the time to test all of those routers and find out more. This was about them exploring just what level of MLO, given it was such a key selling feature of Wi-Fi 7, was actually being provided. And going back to transparency, just how much of what you can do now versus what the protocol and architecture promises is capable, the disparity between those two things. But it's interesting to see just how much information is or is not available around MLO on these brands. But what about here on the channel? What am I going to do to hold myself to account? Let's face it, it's not just them. It's reviewing platforms like NASCompares and others that haven't made anywhere near enough noise on this in the way that Ratings has. And frankly, given the enormity of the subject, it isn't anywhere near as well heard into enough eardrums as possible. Hence the reason for this video. Again, not monetized. All the links are going to them. This is about accountability to a point. And I'd say straight away, number one, I am going to continue talking about Wi-Fi 7 and I am going to mention MLO. But there's going to be a whole lot more caveats, a lot more dissection of that. I'm going to be going through all the existing content that covers Wi-Fi 7 and MLO here on the channel, and when I can't add on-screen text to videos, I'm going to be putting pinned annotations below or cutting around areas on videos where it is completely otherwise impossible to remove it in its entirety. I'm working on a few videos right now, as alluded to earlier on, that feature Wi-Fi 7 products, and I will be editing and amending those where possible. If you see something in the next few weeks that's managed to slip the net, then do let me know, either at Robbie at NASCompares or in the links of those videos, and I'll attempt to amend and change those to make them more direct and more transparent as possible. And as mentioned, this isn't going to be stopping me recommending Wi-Fi 7 devices, because I do think, because of some of the reasons I mentioned, but predominantly the support of 6 GHz and 320 MHz packets, as well as the better handling of data per connection, being better on Wi-Fi 7 does mean it, on a case-by-case basis, probably being a better option to go for Wi-Fi 7. But I do think MLO is going to be less of the gold standard, this is the reasons you go for it, than it's ever been. Now, also in the background, while I'm making this video, I'm contacting every single brand of Wi-Fi 7 routers and Wi-Fi 7 devices that I talk to about their transparency. I'm going to be hopefully getting some statements and quotes from them that I'll either be linking to below in the comments, or if it's sufficient enough, make another video and an article. I'm also going to be reaching out, by the time you're watching this, I've already done it, reaching out to Ratings just to see if there's anything more they think I can or should be doing on my side, and if they'd like to provide anything more, I will add it. And again, remember, Ratings wasn't sent that equipment. They purchased their own equipment. They've got no responsibility to do this kind of investigation. I think that really needs a lot more credit. You know, channels like this get sent equipment here, and it is our due diligence to, you know, when we learn new information, to act upon that. So again, that's the reason for this video, but that's really it. So again, we'll be kind of exploring things on our side, amending articles, adding notes, and but effectively changing some of our perspective on some of the Wi-Fi 7 products that we've talked about, and that should be taking place over the next few days at the time you're watching this. But thank you so much for watching. Again, visit links to all of the stuff we've discussed below. Again, do check out that Reddit post where Ubiquiti addresses some of the points put forward in Ratings video. But again, Ratings is not trying to skewer the industry here. They were just focusing on one element of Wi-Fi 7, and they themselves contest that Wi-Fi 7 still does bring advantages to the table to a greater or lesser degree, depending on the hardware and software that you use. But thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.